I am Sultan Mahmud II, the 30th Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, who reigned from 1808 until 1839. The world I inherited was both splendid and turbulent, rich in tradition yet threatened by stagnation. It became my life's work to reform and revive the empire, to renew its strength and ensure that the Ottomans could stand with dignity on the world stage. My youth was filled with danger and intrigue, a time when rivalries brewed within our walls and whispers of rebellion came from beyond. My predecessors, may their souls rest in peace, tried to hold back the tides of change, clinging to the ways of old. Yet I knew from an early age that we could not ignore the challenges of modernity if we hoped to preserve the empire. My first act was to address our military, a crumbling relic, proud yet crippled by inefficiency and corruption. The Janissaries, once the empire's fierce protectors, had become a stagnant and unruly force. In 1826, I faced them in the Auspicious Incident. Some may see it as ruthless, but it was necessary. I abolished the Janissaries and formed a new, disciplined army, trained in a modern European style, yet true to our Ottoman roots. With the victorious soldiers of Muhammad, we ushered in a new era. I pursued the modernization of our civil administration as well, by founding new ministries to manage finances, public works, and internal security. I established schools that taught the sciences, military strategy, and languages, departing from the traditional religious curriculum to create a more versatile and informed class of officials. During my sultanate, the empire was challenged by several revolts which broke out in different regions, which I had to quell by force. As I subdued Serbian revolts in the west, and put down the Saudi revolt in the east, I unfortunately witnessed the loss of Greece, a painful chapter and a test of my resolve. Away from the battlefield and the halls of government, I indulged in the arts, another side of my sultanship that nourished the empire's soul. I have always been deeply moved by beauty, and I believed that art could bridge the gap between tradition and modernity. I collected and commissioned works that reflected our heritage, while welcoming European artistic influences. I was a poet in my own right, penning verses under the pseudonym Adli. Architecture was another of my passions. I commissioned buildings that combined traditional Ottoman aesthetics with elements of European neoclassicism, such as the Nusretiya Mosque.
Sultan Mahmud II stands as a pivotal figure in Ottoman history, renowned for his ambitious reforms aimed at modernizing the empire amidst internal strife and external threats. His reign was marked by significant transformations, including the controversial disbandment of the Janissary Corps, efforts to centralize authority, and confrontations with both internal rebellions and external adversaries. The Auspicious Incident of 1826 stands as one of the most defining and controversial events in the reign of Sultan Mahmud. It was not only the violent end of the centuries-old Janissary Corps, but also a calculated move to remove a major obstacle to reform and centralization. To understand the depth of this event, one must look beyond its immediate drama and bloodshed to see the political, military, and ideological struggles underlying it. By the early 19th century, the Janissaries, once the elite and disciplined backbone of the Ottoman military, had degenerated into a powerful and unruly political force. They resisted any attempt at modernization, fearing the erosion of their privileges and status. Mahmud had seen the failure of previous reformers like Sultan Selim III, who had attempted to establish a new army, but was overthrown largely due to Janissary resistance. Learning from these failures, Mahmud spent years preparing for confrontation. He gradually built alliances with religious authorities and provincial notables, while quietly training a new loyal corps. When the moment came in June 1826, Mahmud publicly announced the creation of a new modern army, the victorious soldiers of Muhammad, which provoked an immediate and expected Janissary revolt. But unlike previous sultans, Mahmud was ready. He rallied loyal troops and used artillery against the Janissary barracks in Istanbul, crushing the uprising in a matter of days. Thousands were killed or executed, and the corps was formally abolished. But the deeper story is in what this action symbolized: the state reclaiming its authority from a reactionary military caste. It marked the beginning of a new kind of Ottoman state, one no longer dominated by military guilds and their unchecked power, but one that aspired to build a modern, centralized bureaucracy with direct control over its provinces and armed forces. Still, the consequences were not entirely favorable or immediate. The Ottomans had removed a dysfunctional military institution, but they had also eliminated their most experienced fighting force. The new army was still in its infancy, and many provincial powers, such as local ayans and rebellious groups, interpreted the Janissaries' fall not as a sign of strength, but as a sign that the imperial army was vulnerable during a transitional period. This may have been one of the deeper causes behind subsequent revolts and regional defiance, as challengers assumed the center was weaker than it appeared. Mahmud's boldness earned him political space to push reforms, but it also made his regime a target for internal threats. The Auspicious Incident was thus not just a military affair. It was a moment of ideological rupture and redefinition. It marked the end of one Ottoman world and the beginning of another, more modern, more centralized, but also more exposed to the challenges of transition. Confronting rebellions and internal challenges was one of the defining trials of Sultan Mahmud's reign. His entire project of reform, centralizing power, dismantling old military structures, modernizing governance, directly threatened entrenched interests across the empire. Resistance was inevitable. Yet what makes these internal upheavals so complex is that they weren't mere reactions to change. They were also expressions of a deeper anxiety about the shifting identity and cohesion of the Ottoman state. Following the disbandment of the Janissaries in 1826, many local leaders, especially powerful ayans, provincial notables, saw an opportunity. For centuries, the Ottoman provinces had operated with a degree of autonomy, especially in the Arab lands, the Balkans, and Anatolia. With the Janissaries gone and the new army still untested, these leaders suspected the center was weakened. Their rebellions and refusals to comply with imperial directives weren't simply anti-reform. They were efforts to preserve their regional power in the face of an increasingly interventionist state. One key figure was Ali Pasha of Ioannina, who in the years leading up to Mahmud's assertive reforms had carved out an almost independent realm in Epirus. Though he was eliminated before the full sweep of Mahmud's reforms, his legacy of local defiance echoed in later rebellions. In the Balkans, nationalist movements such as the Serbian uprisings had already begun to challenge imperial authority, and Mahmud faced continued friction from semi-autonomous regions trying to resist both reform and full reintegration. In Arabia and the eastern provinces, some of the unrest also intersected with religious tensions. The Ottoman defeat of the Saudis and suppression of Wahhabi influence had temporarily restored order, but it didn't eliminate the perception among certain Sunni tribes that the Sultan's religious legitimacy was vulnerable. In Egypt, Muhammad Ali Pasha, though technically an Ottoman vassal, pursued his own modernization program and imperial ambitions, only barely kept in check by the legitimacy he still had to pay lip service to in Istanbul. Perhaps the most telling aspect of these challenges is how Sultan Mahmud responded. He doubled down on the centralization process, introducing state-controlled education, a modern postal system, regular census and taxation, and more direct control over appointments in the provinces. But he also wielded force where needed. These responses weren't always successful in quelling rebellion in the short term, but they showed his resolve to not retreat into old patterns of negotiation and decentralization. In the end, Mahmud's success in dealing with these internal crises was not absolute. He quelled rebellions, broke the power of autonomous lords, and extended the hand of the state more deeply into Ottoman society. But in doing so, he also accelerated the need for even deeper reforms that would outlive him and continue under the Tanzimat. His confrontations with rebellion were not just battles for obedience, they were battles for the very soul of the empire. Sultan Mahmud's reign was also marked by significant military engagements. The Greek War of Independence posed a substantial challenge, as nationalist movements gained momentum within the empire's territories. The Greeks, inspired by Enlightenment ideals and aided by diaspora networks in Europe, launched a well-organized and determined revolt. Initially, the Ottomans responded with traditional force, relying on local garrisons and regional commanders. However, their inability to decisively suppress the revolt led Mahmud to call upon Muhammad Ali Pasha of Egypt, offering him territory in the Peloponnese in exchange for military intervention. Muhammad Ali's son, Ibrahim Pasha, led a highly disciplined and modern Egyptian army into Greece, achieving several successes. But this only triggered greater concern in Europe, especially as atrocities were committed during the suppression efforts. The climax came with the Battle of Navarino in 1827, when the combined fleets of Britain, France, and Russia decisively destroyed the Ottoman Egyptian navy in one of the most lopsided naval battles in modern history. Though it was not declared as a war, this intervention signaled that the European powers were now willing to forcibly reshape Ottoman borders, a humiliation for the empire and a clear sign that military weakness would no longer be tolerated on the international stage. The Ottoman-Russian War of 1828 to 1829 followed closely on the heels of Navarino. Emboldened by the Ottoman defeat and eager to expand its influence in the Black Sea and the Balkans, Russia launched a full-scale invasion. Despite efforts to defend the empire, the still reorganizing Ottoman army was no match for the seasoned Russian forces. The war ended with the Treaty of Adrianople in 1829, a deeply humiliating treaty that gave Russia access to key Danubian ports, acknowledged Greek autonomy, and opened the Dardanelles to Russian trade. Mahmud, now facing the limits of his reforms and the strength of foreign intervention, turned even more urgently toward military and administrative restructuring. An equally complex episode during his reign was the conflict with the Wahhabis and the First Saudi State. Though it began before Sultan Mahmud's reign, he inherited the ongoing crisis. The Wahhabi movement, rooted in Najd and backed by the House of Saud, advocated for a strict and literalist interpretation of Islam that opposed many established Ottoman religious and social traditions. They rejected the legitimacy of Ottoman control over the holy cities, viewing the empire's religious institutions and practices as innovations, bid'ah, contrary to their understanding of Islamic orthodoxy. They captured Mecca and Medina, challenging Ottoman religious authority in the region. Mahmud, whose legitimacy as caliph depended partly on control of the holy cities, was deeply alarmed. lacking direct power in Arabia, he again turned to Muhammad Ali of Egypt to act as his military proxy. Egyptian forces, modernized and more agile, gradually defeated the Saudis, and by 1818 the first Saudi state was crushed, and the Wahhabi leadership was captured and executed. This restored Ottoman prestige in the region, though Wahhabism would later resurge.